Welcome back, and welcome back to the Horror Master YouTube channel. Welcome back to episode number 3. Episode número 3 on my controversial album series, which the reception of the latest 2 episodes have been extremely good. And I cannot thank you guys so much for the reception of the previous 2 episodes, which you have not yet to see. I said to y'all to watch them, they're pretty fucking good. And probably from this moment on, I might be doing this series a weekly series, like probably a video a week, probably, or maybe around Fridays, every at around 12 Central Time afternoon. I might release the video depending on how I feel. I'm still trying to think if do it like a sort of like a one video per week or 2 videos per week. Like I said, I'm still trying to see the needs of all things. But you know what? Let's get on to today's epic of discussion. As you can see by the title of the video, we're gonna be tackling a album cover that, as new as I was doing this series, I had to mention eventually. And of course, I am talking about the debut album by Mexican super group Brujeria, with their debut album Matando Güeros, released on July 6, 1993 on Roadrunner Records. Now, for those who know who Brujeria is sort of a super group. A extreme metal supergroup consists of a lot of former band members from Fear Factory, Carcass. Of course, the man behind everything all is Juan Brujo. Has been in the group since its inception, with along other guys like Dino from Fear Factory, of course Sean from Napalm Death, and so on and so forth. So, this super group has been at the very front, controversial to the exception, which we're talking about in a bit. But brujeria in Spanish means, in English means witchcraft, which you're gonna see more me talking more in Spanish, because I'm I'm Mexican American. So when it comes to this kind of thing, I kind of know more or less the language and all that. So I'm gonna try to translate as much as I can when it comes to like titles and all that, the events and all that, because I know, me being Mexican, it's easy to understand the lyrics and what they mean. So Brujeria is one of those bands that, in the extreme side of metal, that they talk about, some of the most dark side of life, especially in the Mexico side of life, because Mexico is kind of known for its cartels or cartels, like of course the Sinaloa cartel, Los Zetas, so on and so forth. So they pretty much talk about everything that, people who live in border towns like myself, people who know family in Mexico, the stories, the reports, like satanic rituals, the cartel, the kidnappings, the assassinations. So right off the gate, when a band incorporates that kind of dark side of life into their albums, their lyrics, and their whole personas, you're gonna get some controversy at the very end, at the beginning of the band. And of course, when they released Matando Güeros, it was a really big controversial thing at the moment, because this photograph, of course, the album cover, I'm going to put it somewhere right here, but luckily I have it right here as well. This photograph was taken from a news report in Mexico called the Alarma article. Now, the Alarma article is kind of the equivalent of the Yellow Papers in the early exception of the United States. So there was a lot of stuff that this magazine used to elaborate upon, used to report everything about the Sinaloa cartels, Los Zetas cartels in the mid 90s to the late 90s. So pretty much everything that was going on in the dark world of the cartels and the Sinaloa cartel, the kidnappings and all that. So it was a magazine that wasn't afraid in showing some graphic stuff, like beheadings, people being hanged, I go on and on and on about the horrific stuff you can see in these magazines. And this magazine was unfortunately, out of print, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s. So for good reasons, thank God that wasn't around anymore. But you kind of, unfortunately, in Mexico's papers, they're still allowing to put those kind of pictures, those uncomfortable pictures in newspapers, which is kind of a bit uncomfortable. But regardless of that, so right off the gate, when this album cover was released by the band Brujeria, the controversy came in so hot and so quick that a lot of people began to feel disgust of it. Disgust, because how are you gonna? And this is not a Photoshop picture. This is an actual beheading of a guy who is picked up from a hand picked up a beheaded head. And funny enough, thankfully I have the CD, and the digipack comes with more photos, which I'll show you in a bit about some of the more kind of in-depth kind of things out behind the photo, which is, you know, through description is fine for these photos because they're kind of a bit more disgusting, especially in this one. So I'm just gonna give you like 5 seconds to turn around because this picture is kind of a bit disgusting. So I'm gonna show it right now, and once I say you can turn around. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, turn around. Yeah, it's not the prettiest you're gonna see. So in 3, 2, 1, now you can turn around. So right now, just by that alone, you know the disgust a lot of people of this album cover, to the point that when it was released, a lot of chain, markets like a Walmart or some record stores, or a bit like Target, even though I think I was at the time, wasn't allowing to sell this album with the plain cover inside, to the point they had to put an alternative album cover, which I'll put somewhere alongside the album cover. That way that the album could be sold. And once in the description it says viewer description device graphic images of the album cover. So right up the gate, you know that this album cover was gonna be a very touchy subject. And then of course when you get into the album itself, of course it talks about immigrations, crossing the border, trafficking, drug trafficking, molestation of kids, all the darker side of stuff that you really don't see in the United States as often. I mean, you do see it, but not as much as you go to across the border in Mexico. You can kind of see it right away, like the corruption and all that. And it's kind of a touchy subject because, like I mentioned before, I'm Mexican American. I live in a border town. Whenever I go across, like, you kind of see some fishy stuff. I don't even have to go across. I can just see it in the news, and you can. I mean, as somebody who's have family in across in Mexico, it's kind of it's a kind of feeling that you don't want your family member to be in a situation. So from that perspective, I do kind of relate to that kind of thing in the cartel and all that, because it's the fucking cartel. You don't want to mess with the fucking cartel. But Matando Güeros, which I forgot to mention, in Matando Güeros in English translates to killing güeros, or in other words, killing anybody who's not a Mexican or Latino, or it's a sense, basically killing the white people, killing white people, pretty much, because it's kind of a story that I want to go into, but that's pretty much what Matando Güeros means: killing somebody who's not a native, or has Mexican or Latino, or kind of Hispanic. He's not really Hispanic or something, so it's mostly a pure white person. Not to be racist or anything, but that's pretty much the fucking meaning of it. But like I mentioned before, when this album was released, this gave some controversy, not only in the record, for the record labels, which the record label Roadrunner was happy in selling this album, and he sold quick. I mean, to the point that this is probably that they named the mascot, the head. They made him Coco Loco, or the Boogeyman in English, depending on your translation. But it has become a iconic figure in brujeria, that every time they tour, they gotta sing some great songs from, of course, the album. Of course, Matando Güeros, the banger of a song, Satana Luciasa, 666, Chinga tu Madre, Culeros. Some of those songs are pretty iconic. And then, of course, in late 1993, early 1994, I don't really know the date, there was an incident in Rosburg, Texas. So Rosburg, Texas takes place south of Houston, like maybe, I want to say like a 40-minute drive. So the story goes that these two teenagers, which I won't mention their names out of respect, they unfortunately disappear out of the none. They couldn't be found. It took them 4 days later. They found them in a field, backed up. Their entire bodies backed up, and their heads gone. So of course the police started to investigate the life of these two teenagers, and they found out that one of the teenagers had a poster, of course, of Matando Güeros, and the family thought that it was his son's head, which later found out it wasn't true. But then again, the media, and of course the FBI got involved. I mean, how fucked up do you have to be for the FBI to get involved in a case that involves brujeria? Right now off the gate that brujeria is one of the most controversial bands in their debut album, just for that album cover, which is fucking crazy to think. But the FBI got involved and they started investigating to see if this was actually, the parents' son, which it turns out it wasn't their son. But for the FBI to get involved in the case of brujeria, which I think brujeria was in the FBI lookout for like 10 years because of all the stuff they were right. I mean, take little albums like El Patron and all that. So, I can understand why the FBI wanted to keep an eye look on them, and they actually thought that brujeria was a satanic band, which, even though they would talk about Satanism and all the stuff that the cartel worship, because mostly the cartels, not all of them, they worship La Santa Muerte or the Grim Reaper or Death herself. And it's kind of known that, of course, like I said, Brujeria is a band that writes mostly about the dark side of the cartel, what goes behind the cartels, the stuff that we as in Mexican Americans who have family in Mexico, seeing the newspaper, seeing the news, we kind of know the stories. We know what happens because it's stuff that's not no unknown, stuff that happens almost every day, or depending on the situation of the government. But you know to the point that a city like Ciudad Juarez, which has been considered one of the most dangerous cities in the entire world because of the corruption and the crime. I mean, if you ever seen the movie, what was the name of the movie? I'm blanking right now. The movie, shit, I'm forgetting the fucking name of the movie. Shit, I don't remember the name of the movie, but I'm not just gonna come out to be eventually. When you go to Juarez, you kind of see the corrupt the kind of corruption and um the impact that just seeing that is so impactful in your life that it's kind of difficult to get that out of your hand. But you know it's something that brujeria has taken a part of in this element, because later on they still write about the corruption in the Mexico government, the cartels and everything about it have sometimes gone political in some certain releases, like the other one with the Orange Goblin was in office, but that's beside the point. But for this album cover to be considered one of the most controversial album covers, it is it really one of the most controversial album covers, because for the fact that it actually took the FBI to get into this, thinking that this was the head of an actual teenager's parents, it's kind of fucked up. And like I mentioned before, parents at the time in the 90s were really vocal that why was Brujeria allowed to put this kind of picture in the album cover? So why was Roadrunner allow them to put in the album cover? So I do understand from a parent's perspective, but you gotta remember this was in the mid '90s. This is when the PMRC was at its fullest. So everything that was considered sexually corrupt, everything that was not considered a good Christian like sound covers, you name it, it had to be unfortunately censored. And it still amazes me that today now we can actually appreciate what it actually did for the genre in brujeria, allowing a lot of Mexican bands to kind of take the wave around them, and to the point that brujeria is still touring. And fun fact, I'm actually gonna go see brujeria in a couple of weeks, so I'm gonna be fucking hell of excited to see brujeria finally live. But think back in the 90s, this is like the most controversial, like the most stuff you can think of. I mean, I mentioned before, this was right after, you know, Dawn of the Black Hearts. I mean, the photo, but of course, Dawn of the Black Hearts photo was released till 1995. So before that, this cover was considered like the most controversial cover of all time. And of course, Dawn of the Black Hearts came out, and it was like, no, this took the fucking cake. But for a long time, and for a lot of fans, Brujeria Matando Güeros has been an influential album in grindcore, in death metal, in the Mexican scene. And it shows because, without Brujeria, the Mexican scene wouldn't be what it is today. And I really wanted the Mexican scene to grow because, like I mentioned before, I'm part Mexican. It's my heritage, and I want the Mexican scene to be as important as the UK scene, the US scene, the German scene. I want a representation of the Mexican scene, and bands like Brujeria really allow those bands to show what talents they have. And if it weren't for Brujeria and the album cover Matando Güeros, none of this would have happened. But like I mentioned before, there's a reason why this album cover is one of the most controversial album covers in existence. And that does it for this video, guys. I hope you guys really enjoy this little video about the album covers. Like I mentioned before, this was a really fun video to do. Stay tuned for next week's video. Depending on how I'm feeling, I might do it in the next couple of days or all that. Since we're trying to think what next album covers I'm gonna do. Let me know down in the comments what other album covers you want me to talk about, controversial album covers. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, get your bang. Follow me on my Instagram, follow me on my Twitter. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, stay metal.